It was not that too long ago where I said, hey, look, the UK and the EU can absolutely work together on a ton of different things. It's only going to take us sort of talking, negotiating about things to sort of get things done. And ultimately, what ended up happening was the EU sort of beat me to it, or should we say, beat us to it, by recently offering sort of a reciprocal freedom of movement for young people. Now, bear in mind, I, for the past couple of, well, months, have been constantly getting comments by people saying the EU does not want you back. The EU would never do such thing. It does not do deals. It does not do these types of negotiations. Since that news has come out, those people have been very quiet, very, very quiet indeed. But hey, I just something I want to just point out. But as always, one thing interesting did sort of happen today. John Curtice, sort of one of the big polling election gurus we have sort of in the UK, has now come out and said, hey, look, we could very well easily have within the next 16 years a new EU referendum. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people, when the initial referendum sort of happened and sort of Brexit became sort of a thing, was saying at the time, our sort of path back to the EU isn't going to really occur for another 15, maybe 10, 15 years before we can even have that type of conversation. And because of just how bad Brexit has gone, because of how bad the Brexiteers overpromised what the benefits of Brexit would be, it is not too surprising that attitudes shockingly have changed in such a dramatic fashion. We are now seeing people massively turn around, regret their vote. We are seeing sort of, as you'll see in a moment, more people drop off the electoral register, if you know what I mean. And of course, more young people come onto the electoral roll. And this has, I think, changed significantly the balance of power when it comes to sort of wanting this sort of return and a more re-engagement with the EU, which I think we are going to see. This is why I think Labour, quite rightly at the moment, being very coy about all this stuff, not wanting to sort of reopen all this acrimony going into a general election when you can sort of do a lot of stuff after you're in. So there's a lot of stuff, they can do. Promising to work with the EU could be a range of different things of what they could do. So it is very, very interesting. Before, I've said very likely we are going to get, I think, more proper conversations about Brexit, about the EU in the next parliament, because guess what? A large chunk of the Brexiteers not going to be there. So it is going to create some very, very interesting conditions with inside Westminster to be able to talk about Brexit. I think a lot of people are going to be a lot more open talking about Brexit because remember, this ain't a Labour project. It was and always was a Tory project. And I think even in the Tory party, you will see that pro-EU faction of Tories, which was always there, sitting there, biding their time. I think certainly after the general election, they are going to really start to exert some power. I think they've been sitting there, biding their time, just waiting for all this stuff, just to the disasters to sort of unfold, and then they'll come forward and just go, right, guys, as you can see, Brexit has been an absolute colossal mess. We had a Brexit majority, ruling, government party. It turned out to be an absolute colossal disaster. I think we should change our minds completely. Now, you've already got Tobias Ellwood, who is probably the most outspoken pro-EU member of the Conservatives at the moment. Would not shock me if you started to see more, maybe people flip on that. Maybe you start to see more figures in the non-parliamentary party come forward, start talking about how bad Brexit was, that it was a big mistake, that they shouldn't have done this, that it was, engaging with populism. Who knows what the future may bring? But do not be under any estimation that one day the Conservatives will have to change their stance on Brexit. Like, undoubtedly so, that will happen. But I want to go into what John Curtice said sort of about this potential new EU referendum. So I think it is and does show the possibilities that are coming our way very, very quickly indeed in a lot of these things. So before we do go get into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there's a link to my Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link, where you can all buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there is the Pony Club as well. So thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So off we go over to the Independent. Reporting about this, new EU referendum could take place within 16 years. Polling guru John Curtice says. So, shifting general attitudes towards the EU could now result in another referendum on British membership by the year 2040. Polling expert Professor John Curtice has predicted. Curtice said that the timeline would be dependent on, quote, uncertain politics and, of course, how a potential future Labour government approaches relations with the EU. He said and suggested that the nation's feelings towards the 27-member bloc would change as young people in the UK become eligible to vote, while older citizens who overwhelmingly voted for Brexit drop off the electoral register. I love that. Such a polite way for say they die. You know, oh yeah, they just drop. I love that. Next time you go to someone's funeral, I'm sorry that they dropped off the electoral register. But yeah, anyway. So anyway, he said, if you look so far what's happened to attitudes, and if you look at the age profile and attitudes toward Brexit, you can see why. Curtice told UK and Changing Europe an event on Wednesday. He said a lot will also happen, and about how does our relationship with the EU evolve, and to what extent does the next Labour government soften it or not. One of the things to realise is that the Labour Party is going to get elected by an electorate which is 3/4 anti-Brexit, and Labour's vote is almost as anti-Brexit as it was back in 2019. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has ruled out rejoining the EU if his party does win the next general election, which must take place by January 2025 at the latest. He has indicated an intention to try and improve relations with Brussels and to negotiate a better trade deal with the bloc to try and ease friction at the border. Now, that ultimately believes, to me, that leaves a lot of stuff deliberately vague. That does open up a lot of opportunities because you can just say, hey, I'm doing this deal. It improves our opportunities, but we'll see. But he has also said that the UK will not be a rule taker on issues of regulation, and he's likely to take a very hard line at the issue during the upcoming election campaign, with Brexit backing voters returning to his party in droves. And here's the thing: after this next election, I think, as always, the tides will change. I think people will come to realize we cannot just ignore this. And ultimately, when it comes to the issues of regulation, I've said before, the EU is rapidly regulating faster than we can keep up. But at the moment, that is very, very much deliberate. You may get a substantial change in that. And of course, all it takes is the realization going, what do you mean we're not a rule taker? We're already a rule taker anyway, because we're having to implement these regulations. Otherwise, we can't trade with Europe, and we have no say on what these regulations are in Europe. So it comes to the eventual realization is, well, we have to be part of the EU if we want to say in those regulations. You cannot just avoid that forever. Even Labour will eventually have to come out to that on that front. David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary, has also signalled his intention to strengthen ties with the EU should Labour win, which currently has a double-digit lead in most opinion polls. Turnout at the 2016 referendum was at an all-time high at 27%, with over 30 million people across the country heading to polling stations to cast their ballots. Younger voters were more likely to vote Remain than the older voters. And according to the Tory peer, Lord Michael Ashcroft, his survey found that older people were more likely to vote to sever ties with the EU after decades of membership with the bloc. People aged 40 to 54 voted 56% to leave versus 44% for Remain. People aged 55 to 64, corresponding figure was 57% to 43, and 65 and over was 60% versus 40. Meanwhile, an increasing number of people do think it was the wrong decision for the UK to leave the bloc, which again, big decision on that. A poll by the Tony Blair Institute published last year found that over more than half of voters now believe that Brexit was the wrong decision. Based on a survey of over 1,500 adults carried out at the start of June, the poll found that just over a third still believed that Brexit was the correct decision. The referendum result was 53% leave versus 48% remain. The poll carried out by Delta Poll also said that 18% of the leave voters now believe the decision was wrong. Yep, because that was always the plan of what the Brexiteers were doing. Just say as much stuff as you can, be as vague as possible to get as many people on board. That's why you got the infamous thing of we're not going to leave the single market and customs union, only to now end up with an incredibly hard Brexit. Ultimately, if this idea, if the ultimate end goal of Boris Johnson's oven-ready deal is what had been put forward at the referendum campaign, Leave would have never have won. They would have never have won at all. So let's finish this off then. So over 80% do believe that the UK should have a close relationship with the EU in the future, with 43% wanting the UK to rejoin the EU and 30% preferring a return to single market only. The poll found just over a fifth of people supporting a close relationship with the EU, although not as a member or part of the single market. So, demographics are the future. It's inevitable. It really is not just a matter of if, but just when, to be honest, at this point. And this is something that you are seeing campaigners constantly bring up, that the promises of Brexit haven't been delivered. You've had the recent piece we covered about Frosty's Brexit dreams melting away. You're going to get the fact, ultimately, Keir and Lammy are going to do deals with the EU. That's inevitable. They'll come out and say, oh, no, we're not rule takers because, I don't know, they'll deploy something eventually. I'm sure they will, sort of about that, because you've got to improve relations. You've got to sort of, align with the EU. I've said this before, doing alignment deals is inevitable. We saw very recently, of course, just recently with the EU offering us, freedom of movement, a reciprocal freedom of movement for young people. And yet I'm constantly told a while ago, oh, the EU doesn't do deals. Yeah. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, leave a comment down below, hit the like, hit the share button. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. And of course, we'll see you all next time.